Hello, and welcome to our speaker series of the Soul Care program offered by Volunteer Hospice of Clallam County. My name is Astrid Rafem-Pellauz. I'm the Volunteer Services Manager for Volunteer Hospice. I'm very happy to see you here today for this topic, funeral practices and consumer rights, presented by Beverly Tryk from People's Memorial Association. For those of you unfamiliar with Volunteer Hospice, the organization was founded in 1978 by Rose Crum, a nurse on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. We are one of the very few independent hospices offering nursing care without billing Medicare or any government agency or any patients. We are without any limitations inherent to government-funded agencies. We provide services free of charge, and we have a lot of flexibility in how we offer our services. One of these services is a soul care program, which this speaker series is a part of. But we also offer 2 monthly death cafes, one in Squim, one in Port Angeles, and we call them Tea to Die For because they happen at 4 o'clock, tea time. And they are very informal gathering where people can share their thoughts about death, dying over coffee, tea, and cake. You will find all the details on our website at volunteerhospice.org. The next speaker series in September will be September 13. We invited Dr. Christopher Kerr, Chief Medical Officer at Hospice and Palliative Care Buffalo, to talk to us about end-of-life experiences. I just saw Beverly going like this because, yes, this is a big name in the industry.
That's a big get. What day is that? I'm coming.
September 13. Wednesday, September 13. Dr. Kerr published the result of his research on end-of-life experiences in a book called Death is But a Dream. And that will be a nice talk that you probably want to attend. But today, however, we have a wonderful person with us. We have Beverly Tryk. I'm very happy to introduce her. She's the communications manager at People's Memorial Association. And Beverly has lived everywhere from Southern California to Mozambique, to rural Mozambique. And several years ago, returned to the Pacific Northwest like the salmon she is. So she's going to tell us about that. She's passionate about community health outreach and consumes public health data for breakfast. She's put her aptitude for foreign languages to work for the American Red Cross, Planned Parenthood, American Heart Association, the U.S. Peace Corps, and the Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project. She found People's Memorials when she was preparing for her Peace Corps service, and she had to create her own end-of-life plan. That process gave her a very deep appreciation for the value of open conversation about death and dying. Through her volunteer work, she has become very at home in uncomfortable conversation, and she's happy to help families find answers to difficult questions. In her time not held captive by cozy blankets and gripping reeds, she's a well-caffeinated volunteer interpreter. And I didn't even ask her how many languages she speaks, but I'm sure I can speak French with her.
I wish.
So Beverly, thank you so much for being here with us. I will let you take it from here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Astrid. And publicly, I only speak 3 languages. I have a couple of other in my back pocket, but they're not quite as good for public consumption. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. Okay. Can we see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and open this up a little bigger. Come on. Slideshow. There we go. Okay. So today's session is going to be Funeral Options 2.0. And I want to start out with a couple of introductory items. Just a reminder of the points that Astrid made right at the beginning. We're going to be recording today's presentation so you can review it later. And I'm also going to go ahead and share my slides with everyone. So don't worry about scrambling to get all your notes down. I know there's going to be a ton of information and I'd rather you just soak it up and come back to it later if you need to get some notes down. I want to make sure that we get all your questions answered. So I'm going to go ahead and have you submit them into the chat or hold them until the end, and we'll tackle those at the end. I've been giving this presentation for a couple of years now, so I think I've almost got it perfected in terms of anticipating the most common questions people have about these things. And so it's distinctly possible I might even answer your question in the course of the presentation, but we've got plenty of time set aside at the end to address anything that you're curious about. And just to give a little bit of context up at the front, if you've never heard of People's Memorial, well, welcome. This is your rapid primer on what we do. My name is Beverly, and I'm the communications manager for People's Memorial. We're the oldest and largest memorial society in the US, and we were founded back in 1939 right here in Seattle. We provide funeral education and advocacy services to all Washingtonians. To date, over 218,000 folks have become members of PMA, and of those, about 71,000 of them are still living. So as you can imagine, we stay incredibly busy in the office. There's only 4 people on staff. And when we think about what we do to support those folks, well, education is one of the biggest things. We offer community classes like this and host a bevy of free resources on our website and our Facebook and our Instagram. And if I can ever talk my colleagues into learning a little choreography, you might even see us over on TikTok, but it's a tough sell. In addition to our education work, we're really proud to be able to support our state level legislature with increasing funeral choice, increasing price transparency in a notoriously opaque industry, the funeral industry, and also protecting cultural rights. Here in Washington, we have a just wonderful diversity of peoples, and all of them have their own cultural rights, spiritual practices, religions, community engagement opportunities, and all of those folks deserve equal access to affordable cremation, burial, aquamation, natural organic reduction, and then, of course, those spiritual and emotional practices that help us all grieve and celebrate the lives of those we've lost. I'm teaching a session later this week. If you're specifically interested in learning about green funeral options, I'll be digging into that on the 14th. And if you visit peoplesmemorial.org, you can go ahead and register for that class and join us. I think it's going to be a good one. It's one of my favorite subjects. Let me go ahead and swap over slides. I just wanted to start and make sure that everyone knew that, I'm coming from a nonprofit. We don't have a vested interest in any of the decisions you're going to make. We're purely here for educational purposes. And so it's really challenging sometimes to find good information about death care that's not coming from someone that's going to try and sell you something. So I just kind of wanted to set the mood right up at the top. So swapping over to my other slideshow. Let's go ahead and do this. Okay. And I call it 2.0 because I just made a lot of updates to it a few years ago, and I thought it made it sound more exciting because it can be a tough sell to talk people into sitting in a room and talking about their mortality when there are pretty much 1,000 other things you'd rather be doing at a given moment. I want to start with kind of a provocative thing up at the top here, and I hope you'll humor me. Death is not an emergency. Here in the United States, we have been acculturated from our very earliest memories to our life now, and I'm sure it'll continue on. We're never going to solve this, but we get this sense of urgency that when a death is approaching or when one is taking place, you got to go, go, go. You got to get on the phone. You got to get that body out of the house. You got to get them to the funeral home. You got to get them embalmed, get them buried. And that is real stressful. If you've ever had the experience of planning a funeral or just even been around when a death has occurred, there's a lot going on, and this urgency really adds so much stress to the experience of what is probably already a pretty emotionally loaded moment. So I know this is a provocative start, but I hope you'll follow along with me on this. One of the things that I think provides people some of the greatest comfort and ease is having a better understanding of what the point of a funeral home is. What is the role that they play in this sort of ecosystem? Well, it's important to always remember that the funeral director at the funeral home works for you. You want to make sure that you're partnering with a business that's going to offer what you want at a price that's within a reasonable amount. What's your budget? I feel like I've gotten a lot of feedback over the years from folks saying that they felt pressured into certain decisions, or they had a hard time saying no because they didn't want to offend the funeral director. But it's important to remember that this is a business relationship and it's all about what's working for you. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you or someone you're supporting is uncomfortable or is feeling unheard, it's not impolite to say no or to work with a different business. And I hope that I can help empower you a little bit to feel easier setting these boundaries. The funeral home itself is going to generally be responsible for the handling of that body, from the place where a death has occurred until cremation takes place or a burial takes place. They're going to be handling that. And that's one of the, I would say, one of their biggest values. The other side is really helping the paperwork. And like I said, if you've ever gone through this process with someone, which I imagine you probably have, if you're any affiliation with a volunteer hospice, this is not news to you that there is a just an incredible amount of paperwork associated with death. And going through it can be a big project. There's death certificates to be filed. There are certain authorizations that are needed to be filed to have the disposition of the body arranged, and, burial transit permits and all of this paperwork. If this person is going to need to have their remains repatriated somewhere, there's even more paperwork. And so those are kind of the two primary things that funeral home is going to run point on: the care of the body and the handling of the paperwork. But it's important to know in the state of Washington, you're not required by law to work with a funeral home. So you really get to decide what kind of support is going to be most valuable in a specific situation. For lots of people, they're going to want the funeral home to handle all of these things. They don't have the training or the bandwidth to be tackling this stuff themselves, but there's a lot of really wonderful opportunity for people to be more involved in this process in ways that are meaningful to them. Maybe you really want to be the one that is handling the death care or the transportation or those fine things that can be, a really powerful part of our grief process, but you'd really love it if someone else would deal with the paperwork. That is an option. And so I'm going to go ahead and kind of give you an idea of how we can kind of implement some of these. One of the important things to remember is that if you haven't appointed a certain person to be the one that makes your death care decisions, the state is going to make a decision for you. And this is the flow chart that they're going to use to make that determination about who your next of kin is. For lots of people, this is kind of a non-issue. If you're married and your spouse knows exactly what you want and they're going to make it happen, or, if you have your adult child, it knows exactly what the game plan is, you've written everything down and you feel good about that, that's not a worry. But I think for a lot of us, even if we are in these sort of conventional family dynamics, this isn't a good reflection of who we want making decisions. So you can pick anybody to be this person. And I would strongly encourage you to fill out the form on the left. It's called a designated agent, and I really coach everybody to consider this. Both of these forms are available on our website for free. These are legal documents once signed, and I'm also happy to go ahead and send PDFs over to Astrid to share with anyone who would just like a quick copy. But a designated agent is kind of going to be like your power of attorney for death. I hear lots of folks say, oh, I don't need to worry about a designated agent because my power of attorney will take care of everything. But in the state of Washington, power of attorney does expire at death. So if you want someone in particular to be handling these decisions, you need to make sure that it's in writing. And so this form is how you're going to spell that out. And there's room on there for an alternate person to have a backup plan. And I strongly suggest that. It's just always good to have a plan B. You never know what's going to happen. I know, when I spoke with my parents when they went through this process, it was a little creepy to talk about with them when I was so young. I think I was probably like 15 the first time they told me about the death binder. But they had, really spelled this out and put a lot of thought into this, because in their case, sure, we have these this kind of standard nuclear family dynamic, but they had some strong thoughts about who would take custody of us, or who would handle the disposition of their business or things like that. So my mom might say her primary person to run point on this is her husband, but they go everywhere together. So if she passes in a car crash, it's distinctly possible he's in the passenger seat. What's the game plan if both of you pass together? So you're going to want a backup person. Also super handy if your person maybe travels a lot, or is maybe not easily reachable for where they live, or they live far away. So this is a really, really useful form to try and protect your right to whatever care it is that you want for yourself. And also, I would really encourage you to share this information with the other people in your life to help them do the same. The disposition authorization on the right-hand side is the form that we use to spell out what it is you want done with your body. And you can see here, there's a lot of little pieces on here. One of the great things about this form is that you can be as granular as you want or as vague as you want. I commonly hear from people, you know what, I won't be here, I don't care, do whatever. Well, for those folks, I almost feel like it's more important for them to write those things down than it is if you do have something, more elaborate that you'd like. If you want to say, just cremate me, don't make a big fuss. My neighbor down the street knows this really great place I want to be scattered. You'd write that on here, or you just say, I don't care what you do. make sure you write it down. But I also encounter folks all the time that have really strong feelings about these items. And they might say, okay, so the dress that I want to be buried on is in the left-hand side of the closet in the garment bag. And the casket I like, I really want that baby pink one. That's my favorite. And my favorite flowers have to be at the funeral. And don't you dare let Susan come to the funeral service. She knows what she did in 1978. You can write all of that out. And there's nothing too silly or too minute if it's important to you. And so this can be a super useful tool to help spell out exactly what it is you want and help your loved ones make sure it happens. But I do like to encourage people, again, to always build a plan B in here, because we don't really know necessarily what exactly the circumstances of our death are going to be. So stuff can sometimes be a little chaotic. It's nice to have a compromise item. So here in Washington, we have 5 legal options for what can be done with the body. Of course, cremation and burial. You can also donate your body to science. And then in 2019, we were able to help at PMA, we were able to help get legalized these 2 new options, alkaline hydrolysis and natural organic reduction. I inherited this slideshow from an old executive director, and I kept some of these cheesy cartoons in here because I just thought they were so fun. So I hope you humor me. Okay, so one of the things that we do at PMA is every other year we contact every funeral home in Washington, which is a big project, let me tell you, and we gather data on the cost of their services. And all of this information is scooped together into a database and available on our website for free to the public. So I really encourage you to use it for yourself, and also to share it with any families that you may be supporting in your role as a volunteer, or just your neighbor that you might be talking to about this. One of the reasons that I include information about it in this presentation is, to give you kind of an idea of what to expect in terms of cost, but also to really drive home the importance of comparison shopping. I think it's one of the most challenging things to talk about, because it's this nexus of 2 of the most taboo subjects in American culture, is death and money. So a lot of times people end up with care that they don't really want, or they end up spending far more money than they want to, because they're too uncomfortable to talk about it. And so we look at cremation, for example. This is by and away the largest or the most widely used death care option. It's over 80% of Washingtonians are cremated. And the average cost is going to be over $1,600. And this data is from this past fall, so it's pretty fresh still. We noticed, though, from the most affordable cremation to the most costly in Washington, there was a variation of 770%. And there's no good reason for that. It's not like the most expensive one. They're cremating you with their pinkies out in a gold-plated crematory retort and bugles on your way. It's the same service. And so there's not a good explanation for why this happens. And that, I think, to me, really speaks to the value of looking at a couple of different businesses and comparing prices. I tell people all the time that, it's really strange the way that we shop for funerals. We didn't really get the chance to become experts on it, which I think is fair, which is why we created this resource to help you become experts. But if you had to replace your refrigerator, you're not going to spend as much money as you would on a funeral, but I bet you'd make a spreadsheet. You would talk to your friends, see if they got a good deal somewhere, or, you'd ask them about their warranty. You would want it to match your other appliances. You would have a particular store that you would want to get it at. You might wait for a sale. You would map it out, and you'd plan for it, because it's a big purchase. You wouldn't just walk into Sears and buy the first thing you saw that had doors. You'd have thoughts, you'd have feelings. This is something it's a big purchase, but we're going to spend so much more on a funeral, and it's fully okay and strongly encouraged to use that same level of smart consumer practices in terms of planning for your funeral. I know it's a little taboo, but I hope just to kind of keep reinforcing that idea for you. So when we're looking at another really common death care practice, a direct burial, which is kind of a no frills thing, just straight up burial, not a big ceremony, not a service necessarily, no special preparations. On average, that's going to cost over $3,000, and it doesn't include the cost of the plot. The cemetery plot is a separate purchase and can be very costly. It's really tricky to find out the cost of that, because cemeteries aren't required to provide you a general price list the way that funeral homes are. So if burial is something that's important to you or to someone you love, comparison shopping ahead of time is going to be really valuable. One thing we noticed is that 71% of funeral homes in Washington increased their prices meaningfully since the beginning of COVID. And we've heard a lot of different explanations for that. There certainly are supply chain challenges, since most caskets and urns are coming from China and Pakistan, but also, the increased cost of personal protective equipment. So we're only expecting this price to continue to increase. So like I mentioned, over 80% of Washingtonians are choosing cremation, and there's two reasons for this. The primary one is it's the most affordable option. It still is and has been for many, many years. It's widely available. It's super easy. There's, lots of people really like it for just how simple it is. The number two reason, coming in hot though, is that for a long time, people really felt that this was the most ecologically friendly option. Especially up here in Washington, we're the Pacific Northwest is kind of like the mecca for irredeemable tree huggers like myself. A lot of folks up here are really engaged in the environment and hiking and outdoors activities. And so they're looking at the options and thinking, gosh, I don't want to be buried and like take up land. They worry about maybe like the chemicals they're embalmed with, doing things to the soil. And, so they're thinking, gosh, cremation is going to be the no frills option. Luckily, we've expanded these options. One thing that I think I included a picture just to kind of give an option here for, a really great way to personalize this. I think that even now, after it's been widely available for a long time, people still perceive cremation as not having the same level of personal connection, maybe, as a lot of burial practices that have really rich cultural tradition and celebration built in. But there's lots of really wonderful ways that you can have something that's affordable and still make it meaningful. And I included an image here of some of the urns that we have in our office. There's a really wide array here, and I talk with a lot of folks that feel like in the past they were pressured into a purchase that was really costly, that wasn't really something they wanted. So like the urn all the way to the left is one of the most popular urns that people purchase after cremation takes place. For me though, I look at that and I can't think of a single person in my life that fits. And so I included a couple of options here, like all the way to the right, those are handmade paper urns. And so that's a great option if you're, concerned about the environmental impact of your decisions. That's something that's going to biodegrade. And it's also really lovely when you look at it up close, because it is handmade and you can see there's, all the fibers in it and the different colors, and they have little leaves and stuff in it. So there's just this incredible array of products on the market. And so you're not required to make that purchase in the funeral home. There's a federal law, the funeral rule, that protects your right to buy merchandise anywhere, and the funeral home has to use it. And so I always encourage people to, again, do a little comparison shopping. If you're in the funeral home and all you see are these very buttoned up urns and you're thinking, that was not my loved one, or that's not me, you get to do some more shopping. And two of the places I hear most commonly that people go to, Costco and Amazon. Hear me out. The first joke I always hear from people is, oh, if I buy my casket at Costco, do I have to buy 6 of them? No, of course not. From what I understand, Costco has excellent customer service if you were to buy an urn or a casket from them. The selection is a little bit limited, but you can't argue with really strong customer service over a purchase that important. In terms of using Amazon, that you're going to get a vast array of options. And so if you have something in mind, or you're just like really looking for something that speaks to you, that's a great resource to find something and get a good deal on it. So I know it sounds a little bit weird to do that kind of shopping for either of those retailers, but those options are out there and you can buy anything you want. I know a lot of people that have used cookie jars, which I think is fabulous. And that's a really great, meaningful thing that you could integrate into your home, so, there's a lot of people that are really well suited to, very formal, staid and stoic style urns. But if that's not you, keep looking. There's something out there that's going to suit you. So these are the most common questions that I get asked about cremation. First of all, the process takes about 4 to 6 hours, and it just depends on the composition of your body. There are some different religious communities, or even just, if it's something that's meaningful to you, that have traditions in place where, a certain person in the family has to be the last one to touch somebody before they're sort of sent off into eternity. I want to say this is especially important to Hindu families. And so you can be there for what's called a witness cremation. You're not going to watch the whole thing. As you can see, that's quite lengthy, and there's not a good way to do that. You wouldn't want to watch it all. But you would be there to see your person enter the crematory machine. And you could even push the button to be there, and it's a symbolic process, and that can be a really meaningful thing. A lot of folks also really like to use this opportunity to place special items with their loved one before cremation. And it can be pretty much anything. There's some limitations on items that are, glass or have batteries in them. I guess there was an issue right at the millennium where cell phones were a little bit less ubiquitous and more of a status symbol, where, fancy businessmen wanted to be cremated with their cell phones. So I guess people in the afterlife would know how important they are. But the batteries in cell phones can be damaging, potentially even explode under that high heat. So no more batteries. But, I remember that our co-op funeral home got to serve this family a couple of years ago, where this guy his family had him wrapped like in his favorite blanket, with his favorite James Patterson novel under his arm, and in his world's best grandpa ball cap, which is just like the sweetest thing. And it's something so small, but like it's so powerful and so meaningful for your family. And so there's a wonderful opportunity to build more meaningful ceremony into this. You have a lot of power as a consumer. And it's so weird that I have to include this last one, but it continues to be the biggest point of curiosity for people about cremation. And, I can see our website analytics, so I can see that this is still the number one reason people visit our website, is they want to know about gold teeth. So I have to be the bearer of bad news and let you know that dental gold, it's not very often used now. Generally, those are like porcelain composite type fillings, but back in the day, gold fillings, people think, ooh, yes, all this dental work I've got a little fortune in my mouth. But, as you may or may not know, gold is a really soft metal. And so in order for a gold filling to be able to stand up to, a lifetime of chewing, it's going to be mixed with a bunch of other metals into what's called an amalgam. And so the actual amount of gold in it is really nominal. When a cremation takes place, all of that organic material in the body will be burned away, and what remains is the skeleton. It'll be very brittle, and some of it will be already reduced to ash. Before it's returned to a family, the state requires that the bone be pulverized down into kind of a gritty powder. It's, I think, similar to the texture of kitty litter. In case you're curious, but there's nothing recognizable in it. But because of the nature of this metal mixture, it's going to burn up just like everything else, and all that'll be left at the end is kind of like a crunchy little black nugget. So nothing valuable there. I've encountered some folks who think that they can outsmart the system by extracting the teeth on the front end. If that's something that's important to you, you certainly, if something has nostalgic value or something to that effect, it's certainly your world. We're just living in it. I'd say absolutely go for it. But it's important to know that the only person that legally can extract teeth from a decedent is going to be someone called a forensic odontologist. This is a highly specialized dentist. They're very expensive, and they're the only people that legally can extract teeth. So if this is something that's important to you, you should know it's very expensive to recover. And you're not going to be able to, make any money off of it because of the type of gold mixture that it is. But if it's a sentimental thing, this might be valuable. So I know that's all kind of our deep curiosity about cremation. So in terms of what to do with them, I talked to a lot of folks who are like, the cremation took place. It was lovely. I just don't know what to do with this urn. Lots of families choose to scatter the ashes, and there's a lot of options for this. You can bury or scatter the ashes either in an urn or outside of one. You can get a biodegradable urn that will break down over time if you'd like, or whatever you like. You can do that on your own land. You can do it on other private land as long as you get the permission of the landowner. It's terribly bad manners to do a scattering on land that is not yours. We hear lots of crazy stories, especially about Disneyland, people that really want to be scattered at Disneyland. And unfortunately, this is so common, they actually have a process in the park for how to shut a ride down to clean it after that. So you have to ask permission for that stuff. And so, up in the Pacific Northwest, people are especially really want to be scattered in national parks or state parks. And you absolutely can do that, but I strongly encourage you to reach out to the park ranger that's in charge there ahead of time to kind of see what their process is. They may have some instructions for where they would prefer you to do the scattering, but by and large, they're really open to this. It's a common request. People, they're really connected to this land, and it makes a lot of sense. But, they might ask you to just, step a certain distance away from the trail or pick a particular spot. They don't want you to take the entire urn and scatter it at a trailhead or somewhere where people are walking. So that's absolutely an option. But also people really love to do water scatterings up here, and you can do them on any navigable waterway, which just means ones that's a moving water. You can't do it on a lake or, in a pond, but rivers are good. The ocean is good. And one of the things that I think is really fabulous is you can contact the Washington State Ferries about doing a scattering from one of their vessels. And I've gotten to go to a couple of these ceremonies, and they are so cool. If you let them know ahead of time what you're doing, they're going to stop the vessel, they'll make an announcement, they'll sound the horn, and they'll ask for a moment of silence, and then you can do your scattering. And in the past couple of years, they've started doing a thing where they record the GPS coordinates of where they've stopped so that you can come back to the specific spot that you visited to do the scattering and ceremonially come and visit it again, which I think is just really fabulous. I included an image again of one of those handmade paper urns. This is a really popular product for that purpose. I'm sure if you're in death care, you probably also have had a lot of people ask you about that scene in The Big Lebowski where they do the scattering and the wind changes. I think that's made a lot of people a little bit reticent about handling cremated remains. Understandably, it was a very gross scene in the movie. And so, there's products like this that are designed for water scatterings. And so instead of having to do a loose scattering, you would toss the entire urn into the water. And because it's made of paper, it'll sit at the top for a moment, and then it'll slowly sink down into the water and disperse from there. So this is a really great option for that if you're maybe a little bit squeamish about touching ashes. So kind of in the same vein as cremation, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about alkaline hydrolysis. You might have heard this called by a number of other names. These are mostly brand names. The state of Washington legally calls this alkaline hydrolysis, but it's commonly called water cremation or aquamation. Some folks call it green cremation. And these are all the same thing. I thought I'd include a picture of the machine just so you can kind of get an idea. Looks a little bit like a spaceship. I think one of the most interesting things about it is the front of that is actually a submarine door. So that way you can get a tight enough seal on it to actually do this process I'm going to tell you a little bit about. So in terms of trying to imagine what it means to be a water cremation, well, this process is going to accelerate our natural decomposition using a combination of, high water pressure, warm water, and a little bit of alkaline chemicals. It took a long time to get this option legalized here in Washington. There was a lot of pushback due to some pretty common misconceptions about this process. Oops, getting little pop-ups. So the first one is that people would look at this machine, kind of have a vague understanding. They think, oh my goodness, you're going to boil my grandma. And it's certainly not reaching that heat. It's really going to be that water pressure that's going to break the body down, which is why it has to be sealed up tight with a submarine door. So the water doesn't even need to get that hot for this process to take place. The other thing is people think like, oh, chemicals, it's gonna be like a mob movie and you're gonna dissolve me in a bathtub. No. So like it's right there in the name, alkaline hydrolysis. And so the chemicals that are used are on the opposite end of the pH spectrum from acids. And it's really not going to be that much. I've seen estimates between 5 to 10% of the contents of the tank would be chemicals, and it's going to be something in terms of like an alkaline chemical like potash or sodium hydroxide. If you've ever made soap, like, lye, that's what's going to be used to break this tissue down. So once people were able to kind of get past some of these sort of really extreme ideas of what was taking place, it's really growing in popularity because, like I said, people were looking to cremation for a greener option. Now they're seeing this and it's even greener, and they're really enthusiastic about that. And so here's a couple more images of what the machine looks like. And like a mock-up of what it's like when a person's inside. And so this is like cremation, going to break away the soft tissues of our body. And then at the end, what's left will be the skeleton. The liquid that remains can be drained in, down the drain like anything else. That skeleton will be dried. And then because, again, state law requires that we're not returning things to you with recognizable pieces, it'll be pulverized down into ashes. And so, that's something that people are really curious about, like what happens at the end? Well, you're going to be getting ashes that look very similar. They're going to be a little bit whiter and a little bit softer, like powderier, like a talc. And this is just because what remains is predominantly calcium phosphate. And because it didn't go through the burning process, you're not going to see it carbonized the same way, where the ashes are going to be more gray with darker colors. And so it'll be a little bit more powdery versus the sandier version of cremated remains. And so if you'll humor me, we have permission to use this image to give you an idea. On the left-hand side, you can see the cremated ashes are a bit grittier and a little more gray. And then on the right-hand side, alkaline hydrolysis is going to produce something that's finer like talc. And you can also see that the quantity is larger because of the way the process takes place. You're going to get more ashes back than if you were to do a cremation. But aside from that, you can do all of the same things with the remains after aquamation that you could if you did a conventional cremation. You can do scatterings, you can bury them, you can even buy some of those kooky novelty products out there, like you can get your ashes pressed into a record or turned into a diamond or a really nice paperweight or shot into space. You can do all of those same things with either kind of these. There is all kinds of stuff out there, and it's all fat. You keep shopping until you find the thing that's the right fit, because I bet there's something out there that is going to feel just right for you. And just like with ashes, these are completely safe to handle. They're 100% pathogen and disease-free. You can touch them with your bare hands if you feel so inclined. Like I said, it's not uncommon for people to be a little bit icked out by that. So, there are products that you can do scatterings with, like the paper urn that I showed you. And here's some of the reasons that people choose this option. I think for some people, there's some anxiety built into the idea of a cremation. There's certainly some cultures, like, Jewish folks have a pretty good reason to be uncomfortable with cremation as a process. Some people, they're looking to this and like being broken down by water as being more gentle, maybe more respectful. A lot of tree huggers like myself are pretty excited about the fact that we're not seeing that level of greenhouse gas emissions. This is a much lower energy consumption. And I've seen Catholic priest that testified when we were working to get this option legalized for folks. And he said something about that it only makes sense, like in the circle of life, that, we enter the world like in the warm waters of our mother's womb, and that we should exit the world in a similar environment. Like it just sort of ties our lives together into a big cycle. And so for some people, that is something that just really speaks to them. So it's a really lovely option. I think it's really wonderful. I have to get a new map because so many more states have legalized this option. At the last count I saw, I think it was about 22 states in the US have legalized this option. And as you can see, also a pretty big hunk of Canada. So this is growing in popularity. More and more consumers are seeing this as something they want available in their community. And just something to lighten the mood a little. This is a colleague of ours, Dion Strummer. He was one of the folks that was instrumental in legalizing this in Oregon. And he was so much fun to work with. Oh, I loved working with him. He was the goofiest guy. And obviously he was so excited to be able to finally get his aquamation machine that he decided to model it for us. And so I'd love to show people this, just get an idea. I know that it's death care is one of those things that's tough to change people's minds on, and that's not at all the business I'm in. Like I said, at PMA, we don't have a vested interest in any of the decisions that you make or how you make them. We just want to make sure that you get what you want. The only wrong decision is an uninformed one. So, in terms of addressing kind of the hesitancy to this, some people are, really attached to the way things have always been done. And they're reticent about moving forward with something like aquamation because they see it as kind of a newfangled technology. But it's really interesting. There's generations actually that have really been using this. I've found some instances of aquamation being used as far back as the 90s. And so this isn't really a new or untried technology. It's just becoming available to consumers. I found that there were a number of medical schools, I included some of them down on the bottom there, that have actually been using this process to care for the bodies that have been donated to them to teach their students. So this is being used by some pretty big names down there. And I kind of like to think for myself, well, if it's good enough for the Mayo Clinic, maybe it's good enough for me. So I think that that's pretty insightful to know that it's been in use for a while, just not available to the public. And I'm sure we've all been wondering, how much does it cost? Well, when we did this survey in this past fall, this was the first time we were able to ask about the implementation of this option. And we found that about 27% of Washington funeral homes are offering aquamation. And again, the prices are all over the place. We found some places charging as low as $9.95 and as expensive as almost $4,000, but the average sat at about $2,000. So this is going to be generally more expensive than a cremation, but certainly far more affordable than a burial. So it's kind of sitting in that middle space. We kind of expect that as this option becomes more widely available and more people know about it, the market share is going to change and this is going to become more affordable, which is exactly what happened with cremation in the 60s. So another super popular option, of course, is, you can't argue with the tradition behind a full body burial. It's a rich tradition for a reason. These are some of the most common questions that I do get about burial here. It's important to know that here in Washington, you're only able to bury in an established cemetery. We're one of the few states where you aren't able to bury on your own property. If you would like to do that, it's important to do some paperwork on the front end. You'll have to have your property zoned as a cemetery in order to do that. And depending on where you live in the state, that can be super easy. Just file some paperwork, but there are some municipalities where you have to pay quite a lot of money to do it. So if this is something on your periphery, you'll want to start looking into it sooner rather than later to make sure that you kind of got your ducks in a row in terms of making this option happen for you. It's really important to know that embalming is not required by law, not here in Washington, not in any state in the United States. This is a really common misconception that people have, and it's one of the reasons that people will veer away from burial, is that they're kind of grossed out by embalming, and so they're like, I don't want to be buried if it means I'll be embalmed. But it's really not that common for people to choose embalming. If it's something that's important to you, you should absolutely pursue it, but just know that it's not required by law. So I feel like funeral homes by and large have gotten a lot better about misleading consumers about the requirement of embalming, but I've also heard of a lot of instances of funeral directors sort of tiptoeing to the edge of impropriety in terms of implying that this is a requirement, but it is certainly not. It's federal law says, there's, again, back to the funeral rule, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on. It says that they're supposed to include disclaimers in their price lists that clarify that it's not a requirement by law. So there's that. I also included this image of Tahoma, which is our here in Washington, our national cemetery for veterans. As you can see, the view is incredible. This is a great place to be buried. It's really lovely. And the plots at the cemetery are free for veterans. Of course, there's going to be some paperwork. The Veterans Administration can never resist some paperwork. But it's important to know that in terms of death benefits, it's only the cemetery plot that's going to be free. The cost of the care of the body, as well as any monuments or products that you'd like, are still the responsibility of your next of kin. There are certain death benefits available to veterans, but it's some kind of very complex algorithm that I haven't yet been able to suss out that the VA uses to calculate the value of your death benefits. And it's tied to, the length of your service, whether you served in active combat, whether your death is somehow tied to injury or to active combat. So again, for veterans, I think that a lot of times people are pretty hands-off in terms of anticipating these deaths and planning for the care, but they find themselves really unpleasantly surprised by the entitlements that they have for this care. So you'll want to reach out ahead of time, because these are going to be reimbursements. So you will have to front the money for those costs before you are going to see any money, and it's likely going to be less money than you're expecting. I also encourage people to call sooner rather than later, because as you probably know, if you're a veteran, you're going to be on hold for a while, and you don't want to be doing that when you're frustrated with grief and loss, because that hold music will really push you over the edge if you weren't already upset. So in terms of burial, people are really curious here. Okay, well, if I don't have to have embalming, what are the other things that I can do? And people are really interested in green burial. And so here in Washington, it's really exciting. We do have this here. And there's a lot of opportunity here to really customize your care to meet what is actually important to you. I get a lot of questions from folks that are like, what's the greenest thing I can do? And it's not really like there's like one ultimate green burial. It's kind of like we say that there's shades of green, so there's different opportunities for you to incorporate it in here. And I think this is one of the spaces that's really good for compromise. So if you come from a family that is really sort of bound in their death care traditions, it can be a really tough sell to suddenly be like, I want to be aquamated. You're probably going to get some pushback. So, death care should be about the person that's died, but we can't discount how much that this is happening in the ecosystem of our loved ones. And so you might be feeling some pressure to go for something that's a little tied to family tradition. So a green burial can be a good way to maybe honor some deep-rooted burial tradition in your family, but customize it to be more true to who you are. So generally when we talk about green burial, this is going to be someone that's not embalmed. Oftentimes this person will be in a biodegradable container, like a casket made of woven seagrass, or maybe just directly in a shroud. We can place someone directly in the ground. A lot of times when you're looking at a green cemetery, instead of using, a classic monument the way that we've gotten used to them, they might use rocks or native plants in lieu of a marker, and that can be really lovely. I've included here an image of one of our Washington green cemeteries. And if you didn't know that's what it was, because I told you, you would have no way of knowing that's a green cemetery. It just looks like a lovely little green space. And so there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in the green burial sort of arena. We're getting more and more green cemeteries around the country. Here in Washington, I want to say in Washington we have 6, but I should double check on that, because as funeral businesses are seeing this as more and more of a viable business option, they know they're missing out on money by not catering to the folks that are, thinking about the environment. So here's a couple of examples of those products I mentioned. On the left here, you can see that the woven grass casket, which is really beautiful. And then on the right, this is a really popular product. This is a hand sewn shroud. And you can actually make these yourself also, which is one of the things that I think that is most exciting about this sort of green funeral renaissance that we're living in, is that I've noticed that since COVID started, people really want to be more involved in caring for their loved ones. It's certainly not for everybody. If you're a squeamish person, please don't feel bad for not wanting to be involved, but there's a lot of really wonderful opportunity for you to be involved in meaningful ways. And for some of those people, it is, being buried on their own land, or being placed directly into a grave. There's something really powerful about being the person that either digs or fills in a grave for someone you love, or being involved in lowering your loved one into their grave, being the last person that touches them is just so powerful. And so I really encourage you, if these are things that are meaningful to you, to talk about them with your family and to write them down, so that way they remember what you want and what matters to you. These are some really common questions that I get about cemeteries specifically, because a lot of times people really link funeral homes and cemeteries, of course, but you should know that here in Washington, any funeral home can work with any cemetery. This is a great way to be really cost conscious. So it's important to remember, though, when you purchase a plot, that's a big expense. You're only purchasing the right to burial. You don't own the land. And so the cemetery still does own the land, and they get to make the rules, and they do love rules. They can restrict the ways that you use that plot. They can say how many people are buried in the plot. There's some cemeteries that will sell double depth plots. So like for a married couple, they might be buried, the first person will be dug a little deeper and the second person a little bit more shallow, and they'll share the one grave, and that's very common. But if you didn't pay for that, you can't have that. And sometimes people try to be a little sneaky, and I love that enterprising attitude. But even if one partner was cremated and the other wants to be buried, and then the buried one wants to be buried with the urn of the other, the cemetery can count that as the second person, and so they can say no if they want to, which is really frustrating. I feel like I come across this more often with people that are pet parents, and they want to have their cat's urn with them in their casket, and Catholic cemeteries do not like that, and so they can say no pets in the grave, which is really disappointing if that's like, a super important part of your family. So they can make as many restrictions as they like. They can say, that you have to have a concrete liner that goes around it. I feel like a lot of times these are sort of sold as though they're going to protect the casket, from water or bugs. But the reality of it is that cement is to the benefit of the cemetery. As our bodies break down, the caskets will break down over time too, and that's why you see graves sort of sink in a little bit, is because those things are collapsing. If you put this concrete liner around it, it's kind of like a shoebox almost in shape, that will help hold the land up and keep it level, and so it's so much easier to mow the lawn. And I just feel like if cemeteries were honest about it, like, we just want to be able to mow the lawn and keep it nice for you, I think people would probably be just fine with that. But they try to market it like it's going to somehow make your casket last longer or protect you from the elements longer, and that's really not accurate. So that's kind of something that they have a lot of say in. And they can also make requirements about the size and type of your monument. You know, there's cemeteries that have an aesthetic and they want you to fit into that. You know, if you see a photo of a veteran cemetery, you know, because it looks a certain way, like everyone has the exact same monument, the engravings on them are the same font, you know, there's a uniformity to it. And other cemeteries can say, you know, you can only have monuments this size or this type. Where I grew up in Phoenix, most cemeteries down there don't have vertical monuments. They just have plaques on the ground because it's easier to mow the lawn across that flat surface. So, you know, they get to make that decision because they are a private business. So it's something to keep in mind. If you have your heart set on something, you really are going to want to do a little bit of research ahead of time to make sure that your family can reasonably accommodate that, because it's going to break their heart if you ask for something special and then they aren't able to, you know, provide you what you want. And again, I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating that they're not required to provide a price list. So it can be really tricky if you are trying to do some shopping ahead of time to figure out how much this is going to cost. They might require you to physically come in person to the cemetery instead of a meeting with them. So that's something to anticipate. Plots can be very expensive. One slight sort of thing I can offer you is that we do have a limited stock of donated cemetery plots at PMA. And you can see those on our website, and we're able to sell those for a small fraction of the market value so that people can get access to them because they can be so expensive. But otherwise, it's just really kind of keeping an eye and seeing what opens up at cemeteries. Okay, now I know this is a hot topic people are so excited about, natural organic reduction. You've probably heard this called a couple of different names. I think it's most well known for the company that created it, Recompose. That is a local Seattle business, and we worked really closely with those folks to get this legalized. And this is composting. I borrowed this image from the folks over at Return Home, which is another business that offers this service. And this is going to work a lot like your garden compost. You know, a body is going to be in there with some different organic materials, and heat and oxygen and bacterial processes are going to take place that are going to break your body down into nutrient rich soil. So we legalized this back in 2019 and it became available in 2020. And the folks at Recompose worked really closely with the forensic anthropology department out at Western Carolina University, as well as our own Washington State University, to make sure this process worked and that it was safe and that no pathogens would be persisting through it. And you know, it was a really fabulous research project. There were people that, you know, donated themselves to be part of the pilot study, which, you know, was really meaningful for them, and I think a wonderful option. Here's a couple of images just to kind of help you with imagining. Up at the top, you have Katrina Spade modeling one of the vessels that they have at Recompose. Down on the bottom is Micah Truman from Return Home. And I took that photo and the photo on the right when I was visiting their facility. The one with him I took shortly after they opened, and they hadn't yet installed all their art. But you can see here that their vessels are a little bit more square, and it's just one person per vessel is in here, and this is a contained composting process in this vessel, or these ones that look more like a beehive. And you know, since I took this photo, they've gotten some really nice art up in there, and so this is that same room, and they've got these huge panels that are just like sitting in a forest, and you can come and visit with your loved one, because this process is going to take quite a while. It takes at least a month to compost an entire person, sometimes up to 6 or even 8 weeks. And that's one of the reasons this process is quite a bit more expensive than the other death care options. Like I said, this has probably been called in the media like human composting, or you've seen it called recomposition. The folks at Return Home call it terramation. We found from our price survey that 20% of Washington funeral homes are now offering this by partnering with the 4 businesses in Washington that offer this. And again, the prices are all over the place. So you can see it as low as, you know, about 4,000 there, and then up to 7,000. And, you know, for folks that are interested in this option, particularly since there's so few of these businesses, I really encourage you to reach out to them directly about scheduling a tour. Each of them has a really unique identity, and you'll want to go with the one that feels right for you, and take a tour, see the space, hear what they're about. And I think that that's a really powerful thing. I know I worked with Return Home on an event last year where we did a guided tour, and I did a PMA education event there, and there were a couple of grown men there who started weeping, and I was so stunned. I was like, oh no, we've done something wrong. But, you know, one of the guys said, there's something about being here that really brings this to life. And I could just imagine myself doing this process and like I love the idea of like my grandchildren coming to visit me in my vessel and like sitting and playing. Like he's like, there's just something about this that's bringing me so much comfort. And so I think that to me, that's just this constant reminder that there's something out there for everybody. And, you know, you want to make sure that you're identifying what really is meeting your needs. And for some people, it is absolutely the sort of conventional funeral home that you grew up, or conventional burial that you grew up with. That is part of your cultural tradition. But for a lot of us, that isn't necessarily a reflection of what works for us. And I think for some people, they haven't really engaged with their mortality enough to have thoughts on this. So maybe the only feelings they really have is they know what they don't want. It's not what they do want, but what they don't. And that in situations like that, it can be really challenging to fill out a disposition authorization or to, you know, explain to someone the kind of care that you want. And so I encourage people to explore the option of writing a values letter instead of filling out one of those forms, because it's this opportunity to explain what it is you care about and then gives your loved ones the latitude to make the choices about it. So you might say, I don't really care, you know, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in all of that. So I just want something simple that won't cost a lot and I don't want you making a big fuss. Well, you can write that in the values letter and then they'll know that, you know, you're giving them permission to make the choices they think that are appropriate, as long as, you know, they don't spend a lot of money. Or, you know, like in my case, I might say, you know what a tree hugger I am. I always have my reusable bags. I'm on that bicycle. I'm recycling. I'm a vegetarian. I want you to make the choice that's most environmentally friendly. Like, you know, sometimes people will say, you know, I've got my heart set on being composted, but maybe you're a thrill seeker and you're out ziplining in South Africa when you die. It's going to be really tricky to get your intact body repatriated to the US and then composted. So this writing a values letter is going to give your family the latitude to say, okay, here's the thing that matters the most at the end of the day is she cares about the environment. What are the choices that we have in this moment that'll get us the closest to that goal? And so I think that can be super helpful in terms of trying to go through this process with folks. And again, this isn't for everybody, but I think that a lot of people aren't aware of how accessible home funerals are. And like I said, Washington state law is not going to require you to work with a funeral home if you don't want to. If you want to wash and dress your loved one, if you want to have a wake in your home, if you want to transport your loved one to a crematory or to the cemetery and do the burial yourself, those are all things that are available to you. And you can do as many or as few of them as you want. And I've noticed since COVID that people want to be more involved. And this is called participatory death care. It's kind of a shift from this sort of paternalistic approach where the funeral director is the expert on death and you just have to do what they say. When we move into participatory space, we're looking at this more as like, what are the ways that we can be involved in the care and the touch and the processing that are going to be meaningful to us as we grieve, and also, you know, give us this chance to really care for someone we love. And I think we see this quite a bit more when people are caring for children. But this is an option that's available to anybody. I will say that if you've never done this process yourself, that it might be really useful for you to consider working with a death doula or to consult with a funeral home at least to get an idea of how to do these things safely. It can be really easy to throw your back out trying to prepare someone. And if you haven't done it before, you might want some expert advice on how to do it safely. And then full body donation is also something that we notice that there's a lot of enthusiasm for in Washington. And there's a lot of places that you can do this. Generally, people will donate to med schools. And here in Washington, we've got the University of Washington, as well as Washington State University. I've also heard a rumor that Bastyr, the naturopathic med school, accepts donations as well, but I'm not positive about that. And if this is something that you're considering for yourself, you will have to do some paperwork ahead of time. Because this is such a popular option, they get lots of folks that want to be donated, and they don't accept every donation. So you will have to do an application, and those are up on our website, as well as you can visit the websites for either of those schools to kind of get their little info packet on what you need to know. They just have limited space to keep people, and maybe if you're an extremely tall person that won't fit in their cold storage, or if you're especially heavy, or maybe your cause of death was a car accident or something, there's just certain types of bodies that they're not going to be able to necessarily use in that setting. So you'll want to make a backup plan. You can let your family know in your values letter, for example, like, what a passionate person I am about education. I want to go back to teach the doctors of tomorrow, but if I can't have that, compost me. So we're looking at the options for backup plans, because your loved ones are going to want to do the thing that you wanted, and it's going to break their hearts if they can't do it. So we want to give them the tools to get you as close to what you want, and also be realistic about some of the moving factors. So in addition to those med schools, you can also donate to mortuary schools. Here in Washington, we have Lake Washington Technical Institute, and that is where most funeral directors here go to school. And so you can be donated there so that those folks can learn how to embalm and how to care for bodies as they move forward in their careers. And I've also heard that there's quite a few options for-profit body donation programs, but truthfully, I don't know that much about them. I've been meaning to flesh this slide out a little bit with that information, but I don't know a ton about that just yet. And then organ and tissue donation is something people do ask about a lot. If you don't donate your whole body, maybe you don't want to, that's okay. There's a lot of really wonderful opportunity for your body to help potentially save someone else's life. And here in Washington, we work with Life Center Northwest as well as Sight Life. Sight Life does cornea donations, and then Life Center does all the rest of the organs and tissues. And one thing that I think slows people down from choosing this option is that they think that they have to just sign everything over. And it's important to know that you can actually decide which organs and tissues that you want to donate. Most people say to me, like, I would love to be an organ donor, but I just don't want them to touch my eyes. That's so gross. It's eyes that people are really uncomfortable about. They don't want to donate their eyes, so they don't donate at all. And so you can actually say, exactly what you do and do not want to donate. And you need to make sure you talk to your family about this, because we do encounter a lot of families where a person has decided to be an organ donor, but they didn't tell anybody. And now it's a surprise and also a fight. So we want to make sure we're fostering that good open conversation with our loved ones, so there's no surprises. And it's not enough just to have, when you sign up for your driver's license to get the little sticker. You do need to register with these organizations to make sure they know you're a donor. And so people are often worried, about, if I'm an organ and tissue donor, how will that affect how my body is cared for in terms of the funeral home? And it won't impact them. This is sort of a well-oiled machine. Funeral homes have been working with these organizations for a long time, as well as hospitals. And so, at the time of death, the hospital is going to coordinate with one of these organizations who will take care of the tissue procurement. Once they're done, then your family would go ahead and let the funeral home know, and then they would come take your body into their care. And any death care option remains open to you if you have been an organ and tissue donor. So that's no worry at all. I know that a lot of people are a little bit reticent about this option. Like, they feel good about it, but they have some anxieties that it's going to impact the quality of care they receive. And it's important to know, I used to be an EMT, and I hear a lot of people say, like, I don't want to be an organ donor because I don't want them to not try to save me. And it's simply not the case. When we're trying to save your life, we don't have time to rifle through your wallet and see whether or not you're an organ donor. And from a practical standpoint, in order for you to be a good donor of organs and tissues, you have to be as healthy as possible. So we all actually have a vested interest in keeping you as healthy as possible so that you could be a donor. So they're not going to know until you're well into the care of a hospital. And when I work with the folks from Life Center Northwest and from Sight Life, they always say, don't rule yourself out. Sometimes people say, I wish I could be an organ donor, but my bum knee or something like that, or I had this illness or that. Reach out to those folks and talk to them, because it's distinctly possible you might be qualified. You shouldn't rule yourself out, is what they always tell me. So as I'm sure you picked up on, there's a lot of decisions to be made here. You're looking at things like services and merchandise, and do I have a ceremony? And what if I don't want a service at all? Or what if I have these important religious and cultural traditions that are not optional? And also, what about COVID-19 considerations? You certainly don't want this important ceremony to turn into like a super spreader event of some kind. There's a lot of things to be taken into consideration. And one of the biggest things is, this anxiety about money. And people are really thinking like, gosh, who is it that's going to be footing this bill? And, here's the answer to that. It's going to be your next of kin. If you don't have that person or a designated agent, it's going to be your estate that is going to be liable for the cost of your care. Unfortunately, there's a number of situations in which you don't have any assets, and someone might have to rely on their county for an indigent cremation, and the funds for this are super limited, and this is not an ideal situation. At PMA, we do have a funeral financial assistance fund, again, very limited, and it's really just kind of a bare bones thing to try and help get a simple funeral so that you don't have to rely on your county for this. I will say that these counties are really doing the best they can. I've gotten to go to the King County ceremony. I think it's every other year now they do a ceremony where they take all of the cremated remains that they have accumulated from indigent cases, and they will inter them at a cemetery. And they had a beautiful ceremony the last time I went, where they invited as many of the families as they could get in touch with, who were related to these folks. And they had all of these faith leaders from different communities, and they put them in a line. And so the first person would say a blessing in their language and then read like 10 names. And then they would go to the back of the line, and the next person would say a prayer in their language and read 10 names. And so it was a beautiful ceremony, but it's not something we want to rely on. That can't have been anybody's first choice, to share their funeral with hundreds of other people, so something to keep in mind. So like I said, again and again, shopping around is going to be the move. This is going to be such an expensive price, that you just want to make sure you're getting exactly what you want. Don't go into debt over something that doesn't make you feel good. Funeral homes are required by law to give you a quote over the phone. If you come and visit them, they are required to give you a written and itemized general price list. One thing that we're really excited about is, we've been doing this price survey since 1978. And so we've now got it up to 54% of Washington funeral homes are publishing those prices on their website, which is going to make things even easier for consumers, because when you're grieving, you don't have time to do a little road trip all over the place to visit all these funeral homes. And we're working to have the federal funeral rule updated to require this by law. And again, please use that price survey. We're not doing it for ourselves. We want to make sure that you have the information you need to get the care you want and support your loved ones to do the same. And sometimes people are, looking at all these things, and they've got all of their feelings about their death care, and they're still wondering, how on earth am I going to decide who to work with? Again, we're treating this like any other big purchase. In choosing a funeral home, you're going to look at the cost. You're going to look at the quality of service, the reputation in the community. It seems a little kooky, but you can use Yelp and Google reviews. I would say to always read those reviews with a grain of salt, because I think we all know that the only time any of us writes a review is when we've got something to say. But it can be valuable feedback to kind of know what you're in for. And a lot of times the determination is based on, the different kinds of services or facilities offered. Like if you do have a particular religious practice, you'll probably want to work with a funeral home that's familiar with it. Or if you want something like composting, you'll only be able to work with a funeral home that offers that. But by and large, the number one reason people choose the funeral home they do is the location. It's generally just going to be the funeral home that's closest to where the death occurred. It doesn't have to be, but that's generally just what happens. So like I said, Yelp and Google are resources that are out there. Let's put them to work for us. And we're thinking about that money again. One of the really common things people say is, oh, well, I guess I should prepay for it and lock that price in. But it's important to know that it's pretty much impossible to lock a price in. This was a really common practice in the 60s for people to prepay for funerals and lock that price in. But now we're all living so much longer that funeral homes went, oh man, we just lost out on a lot of money. Look at that person lived to 101. So it's important to know that if that's why you want to prepay, that you're not going to be able to achieve that. If you encounter a funeral home that says they will lock a price in, you should know that there's generally going to be some fine print that you're going to want to read. I've seen two different things happen. One is that you may prepay and lock the price in, but it won't include something like administrative fees, and then they could charge whatever they want for that at the time of your death. Or I've seen funeral homes artificially inflate the cost of the care on the front end when you prepay in anticipation of inflation down the line. So please always read the fine print. Really the only time that I would advise, or we at PMA would advise you to prepay, is if you're looking to do a Medicaid spend down, in which case that is a great thing to do. But just to keep in mind, when you're prepaying, you're trusting someone else to keep that money safe. Here in Washington, generally people will, with the funeral home, they'll create a life insurance policy that sets that money aside, but they can't guarantee the price. And that's really the number one reason people want this. But I hope that doesn't discourage you from doing financial planning. There's a couple of ways you can sort of plan for this cost, and one of those is you can set up a funeral trust account. You can also set up a pay on death account, which is kind of like a special savings account with your banking institution, where those funds would become available at the time of your death. But by and large, the most common thing people do to do financial planning for this is they will get a life insurance policy specifically for funeral expenses, and it'll pay out for that. And these are all better ways for you to do the financial planning, but retain control of your money. Because maybe you're going to have next year, you'll think, gosh, we had another snowpocalypse and I just can't do it with this weather anymore. I'm moving to Phoenix. Well, you want to be able to take your stuff with you too. So this is a great way to be able to pack your money up and take it down to Phoenix. So the long and the short of it is that People's Memorial encourages you to think about what you want, talk about end-of-life wishes with your loved ones, and then put it in writing. Minimizes the fighting and maximizes the clarity, and do it today. Lots of times people think like, oh, I'm young and healthy, what do I care about this? But that's a great time to do this because you have plenty of time to research and you don't have to be stressed out and worried. It's just going to reduce a lot of stress down the line. It's never too early to do this. I know lots of people are a little bit superstitious and they think, gosh, if I do this now, it'll summon death to me sooner. But I got to tell you, if that were true, we would have no friends at PMA. All we do is talk about death, and we still have friends. We've got friends. So do it today. And once you do, you can rest in peace. I just saw some really great facial expressions. So here's my contact information. Please reach out to us at any time. We're an education nonprofit, so there's no question too weird, too morbid. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I mean, this isn't like a challenge to come up with like the grossest thing I've ever heard, but we're here to help support you all in getting what you need. And then, as you support other people, help kind of pass that information along.
Wow. Thank you, Beverly. That was a load of information, truckload of information, a casket load.
I know, definitely a casket load. I'm so sorry, you all.
It was excellent. Yeah, lots of very good information here. There are a couple of questions in the chat. Yeah, so one of them was by somebody who is still online, I think, but I can address that questions. Donald asked, is aquamation available at regular crematories, or is this a specialized service? And is it available in Clallam County?
It is a specialized service. Right now, as far as I know, there's only one aquamation machine in the state. So any funeral home that is offering the service is subcontracting with that business. I'm not sure off the top of my head about Clallam County, but that is on our price survey. So if you want to look and see some of your local funeral homes on the price survey, it'll show whether or not they're offering it, and then also the estimated cost of that service at that business.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, to my knowledge, it's not available in Clallam County, but I could be wrong. And then there was another question. Well, Linda just asked, does a family get the cremated remains? Yeah. So, Linda, if you're still here, maybe you want to flesh out your question because I'm not sure where it's coming from. Oh, Linda, are you there?
Okay, well, yeah, so after the cremation takes place, the funeral home will contact you to let you know the urn's ready, and you can either come in and pick it up, or they can ship it to you if you're out of state. Those are options. And some funeral homes also offer scattering services, which is something we see where people don't have any family locally. So maybe you moved out here on your own and the rest of your family's in Chicago. And they're like, well, we can't really come out there. We're older, we're not really ready to do a cross-country trip. They can actually pay the funeral home to do a scattering for them out in the Sound or in the mountains or something, and so that's an option. Yeah.
Well, Linda, you unmuted yourself, so why don't you tell us? Maybe your question had to do with an earlier question too. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious. The remains once the cremation has obviously if it's composted, that's perfect to go in your garden.
Yeah. Oh, so you were looking at compost. Well, for that, you're going to get quite a lot of soil back. It's an estimated after composting.
Oh yeah, I said cremated. What is wrong with me? Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. No, don't worry about it. It's easy. There's a lot of terminology at play here. It's no worries. So after composting, you're going to end up with about a pickup truck bed of soil. And even for the most Yeah, but even for the most avid gardener among us, that's quite a lot. And so it's not uncommon for families to elect to receive a smaller amount, whatever size you want, for your own garden, and then even donate the rest of the soil. And so I think this is one of the coolest options because, as far as I know, all 4 businesses that are offering composting here in Washington have partnered with land trusts, so you can donate your soil to help rehabilitate exploited land, which is phenomenal. Because people say all the time, like, I don't know what I want. I just want to be a tree. And then, that's the option that's going to get you closest to that. And you don't get to be just one tree, you get to be a forest, which is so cool.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for cremated remains, there was a question just a bit
Mhm.
earlier in the chat, and the person had to leave, and I told her I was going to make sure to address this question. She
course.
wanted to know several things. One is there any organizations similar to People's Memorial Association in the state of New York?
Yeah, there are a couple actually. If you go onto the website of the Funeral Consumers Alliance, I think their website is funerals.org. There's a couple of New York organizations that do some similar work to us. And then it should have their contact information on there.
Okay, and then her second question was, what happened to the remains when a body is donated to science after the science people are done with the body?
After the science is done? Well, it kind of depends on where you donate it. Some, like if you donate to a med school, it's not uncommon that they will use your remains for maybe a year or 2, at which point they're gonna either have you cremated or aquamated. And this is something you'd want to check in with the individual school about how they handle it, because some universities, after that process, they'll then return that urn to your loved ones, but some of them won't do that, and they'll do instead, like I think the University of Washington has a ceremony where they will inter the ashes of all of their donors in a ceremony at, I want to say the cemetery is Evergreen with Shelley, but I'm not 100% on that. So you'll want to reach out to the individual institution to see kind of how they handle that.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I had a question.
Sure.
Do you know where the green cemeteries are in Washington state?
Ooh, off the top of my head, no, but I can do a little digging for you and see what I can find. It's interesting that, if green burial is something you're interested in, I really would encourage you to contact your local cemetery to ask them about it, because there's a lot of different types of green cemeteries. Like there will be a whole cemetery that'll be a green cemetery, but there's a lot of cemeteries that are starting to do parts of their cemetery green. Like they have a conventional cemetery, but then they'll designate a certain area where they do green burials. So you'd want to touch base with them about it, because it's something that's becoming more and more popular as these cemeteries are seeing it as a viable business option. One of the things I think is really cool is conservation burial grounds. And so there are places around the country where people are zoning land as cemeteries and then rehabilitating the land to help preserve it from development in the future. And so it's a great way to actually like protect the land, because once it's a cemetery, it can never be, developed on. And then that'll allow you to bring back, native wildlife and plants and, really help nurture it back to health. And so those folks are going to be very green with the way that they handle burials on site, but their priority really is to care for the land, which I think is phenomenal. It's a really great way to sort of use the law to help the environment.
Yeah, that's very true. That's really nice. And yeah, I mean, I hope that, the land can never be used for something else again. But in my experience as a person from European descent, I know cemeteries can be moved and remains can be really moved around.
Oh yeah, there's a ton of really fascinating cemetery practices in Europe. Like grave perpetuity is really interesting, and that's something that's pretty common in, I want to say, the Netherlands, where people will sort of rent a grave for 10 to 15 years, and then after that point, most of the organic material in our body's broken down, and it's just our skeleton. And then so you're kind of just renting the grave until your body breaks down, and then your family can take your bones after that and either bury them somewhere else or have you cremated then. But I think that would scandalize Americans, the idea of like renting a grave. But in other countries where they have substantially less land than us and more people, that's just a reality. No one would think to look twice at something like that. So every country has wildly different laws about death care. In Germany, you're not allowed to have cremated remains in your home.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
the only people that legally can touch ashes are funeral directors. And so it's like every country handles it very differently. It's super interesting.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you, like, you know about the Body Farm in Virginia?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
You know,
one of the
I'm kind of weird. I'm really weird. You know, it's like I always bring this up. It's like, does anyone know about the Body Farm?
No, not weird at all. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 body farms here in the US. The one out on the East Coast is the most famous one, but yeah, it's one of the ways that you can donate your body is you can donate it to this university, and they will have this very carefully guarded piece of land where they study the decay of human bodies, and they use it to train law enforcement and different types of forensic scientists about the conditions under which bodies break down, and it helps them hopefully solve crimes and learn more about the science of bodies. It's a little gruesome, but it's super interesting. And so that's another really great way to give back. You know, you can train doctors, you can train funeral directors, you can train the FBI. There's so many ways to help have your body kind of help the education of the country, which is very cool.
Yeah, I know. You know, your legacy goes on after you're dead. It's kind
Yeah,
of,
I love that. And that's something people say a lot about composting. Like they like the idea that they'll like continue to contribute. But I remember one time I gave this presentation and this little old lady told me like, you know, I worked my butt off raising my kids. When I die, I don't want to be useful again. I deserve a break. And I think that is very true also. You don't have to keep working afterwards. It's that American puritanical work ethic. We can't stop ourselves.
yeah, maybe.
But I have noticed it goes a long way towards helping us deal with mortality salience, that there's something of us that lives on. And that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah. Well, does anyone here have any other questions or comments? You know, we're a small group here, so just unmute yourself and speak up.
If you're feeling a little shy, or maybe your question's a little bit sensitive, you can always reach out to us at PMA. You know, it's very much our wheelhouse to talk through those things, and we want to be a resource.
I would like to ask a question. This is Linda. I'm glad you brought up body farms, Astrid. I've been interested in them for quite a long time.
Ooh.
And my question is, you said there were 3 of them in the US?
I think it's 3.
And what is the closest one to Washington? Because it's very expensive to ship a body.
It is. No, trust me, I'm well aware. Very expensive. I want to say that there's one in Colorado. I've been meaning to look into that because it's something I'm really curious about too, because people are so interested in donating their body to science. If that's you, I strongly recommend, there's this phenomenal book by Mary Roach called Stiff, The Curious Life of Cadavers. And she's a science communicator, and she wrote an entire book about what happens to your body when you donate it to science. And so it covers all kinds of different things. And I think that it's pretty different than what you might imagine. It's maybe not the book for you if you've got a weak stomach, because some of it's a little gross, but she does talk about body farms and specifically about the folks out in Tennessee. And it's fascinating. It's such a fun book for what a serious subject it is. She's very cheeky and really informative. It's exceptionally well researched.
Great, thank you.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, and I put the title of the book, Stiff, The Curious Lives of Cadavers, by Mary Roach, you said? Yep. Okay, I think I got the spelling right.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay. I just love her books. She writes so many good ones, but that one I think I've read like 3 times. It's phenomenal.
Okay, all right. Anyone else has any comments? No. Okay, it looks like we're almost to the top. I had actually one little question. It's like, you mentioned veterans that can get free services, you know, at the Tacoma Cemetery. What about spouses of veterans? They qualify for that?
Yeah. And same limitations, that the plot itself will be free, but the care of the body will be the responsibility of your next of kin.
Right. Okay. Well, Beverly, thank you so much. This was really a lot of information, and I will get from you the PDF of the presentation. Absolutely. So I will mail this to anyone who had registered, and the contact information, you know, that you already have on this on the PDF will also be in the email, and then you'll get the recording. So thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Beverly. This was really fun.
Oh, no, happy to do it. And it's wonderful to get to see some new people.
Yeah, I know. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.